Are you looking for a pattern to use with jelly rolls? Let me help you out. Hi, it's Hannah with Fabric Café, and welcome back to another episode of What Quilting Taught Me. This is a series where I show you quilts that I have made and how I did things differently or how I broke the rules, and if I made any mistakes along the way, how I fixed those. Saturday was International Sew a Jelly Roll Day, so to celebrate, I thought I would show you a quilt that I made using a jelly roll. So let's go check out the quilt. This is our Simply Strips pattern from our Quilt Favorites book. I really wanted to use a jelly roll in a 3-yard quilt, and so I was on the quest to find the perfect pattern. Simply Strips is a great one to use because all of your blocks are made using strip assemblies that you cut into the blocks. And jelly rolls are great to use in strip assemblies because you just need to make sure that your strips of fabric are the same size or smaller than your jelly roll strips. Jelly roll strips are 2.5 inches wide by 42 inches long, so that is perfect for a width of fabric cut. You sew 3 strips together, and then you alternate them, so then you end up with this really cool kind of zigzaggy effect down the quilt. I had to change my fabric placements around a little bit. Normally this is your fabric 1, and you can see it's my darkest, plainest fabric. So I'm gonna give you a little bit more in-depth look at why I did that. So let's put it on the table. This is our Simply Strips pattern that comes from the Quilt Favorites book. This book has 8 different patterns, and all of them are written for 3 different sizes: a lap, a twin, and a king queen. So it makes them really versatile. And you can even see on the wall behind me is another Simply Strips made up in like pinks and blacks, and it's so cute and sweet. So whatever your fabric interest, there's a pattern in here for you. So let's take a look at a 3-yard version that would work perfectly for this quilt. We tried to stay in the kind of frosty snowflake world that my quilt is made in. We have our beautiful fabric number 1, and this is gonna go everywhere you see this dark blue here in that biggest square. And I love this fabric so much. It's got a little bit of sparkle to it, just a hint of shine with a little silver, and it's so beautiful, has a lot of movement, a lot of catching the light, gorgeous. So that'll go everywhere you see this, as well as on this border here. And then for our number 2 fabric, we have this speckly silver glitter shine on a nice white background. So that'll make your snowflakes really pop. And this is gonna go everywhere you see this medium-sized square here. And it will also be one of your borders. And then we have our beautiful fabric number 3, and it's the same print as our focus, but in a different colorway, which works really well for a pattern like this. And also the scale of the pattern with the snowflakes is a really good scale for this particular pattern because our blocks are a little bit smaller. So this is gonna go everywhere you see this little strip right here, that kind of framing strip, and will also be on your 3rd border and your binding. Let's look at a comparison between my quilt and this made up in Simply Strips. It's so pretty, it's so peaceful and soothing. That silver really makes it pop. Then you can see, compared to my quilt, there's just more going on. And you can see all the little patches of different prints poking out there with that one solid to really tie it all together. And the borders, I think, are really fun, having those different colors to frame it on the corners. So there's really a lot you can do with these patterns. You can change them up. You can make all of the strips a different color, even if you wanted to, instead of using one solid throughout. So the sky's the limit. You have tons of options. So this blue snowflake kit is available at fabriccafe.com, but quantities are limited. When I first started this project, I actually started with my pattern first, rather than my fabric first, which is opposite of what I usually do. And the reason is, I just really wanted to use a jelly roll in something. I thought it would be a fun challenge and something interesting and new to try. So I went through the Fabric Cafe patterns and I started looking for something that would work. Your biggest requirements are, you need to have a piece that is the same size as your jelly roll or smaller. And like I said at the quilt, we have our jelly roll strip. These are 2.5 inches wide, and they're with the fabric longs, 42 inches. So they really work quite well for a strip assembly, especially if you find a strip assembly that is the same size, because then you just sew and go. Now, simply strips, there were some pieces that were smaller than my 2.5. So what I did is I went down my pattern cutting instructions and I looked to see what could be cut down. And I found there were 2 pieces in my strip assembly that could be cut down to make it work, and 2 borders. So I thought, okay, this is perfect. I'll use all of my jelly roll strips for those pieces. And then I had to accommodate and put a little bit more fabric, because as you can see, we have a nice big block right here, and we have a nice big border. So what I did is I just incorporated an additional fabric. I used about 1.5 yards because I wanted to use it for my border, my number 1 placement here, and my binding. I have a little bit left over because I got a little extra since I liked it so much. And you can just see all of these different light colors with these pops of dark blue. I thought a dark blue to go with them would be perfect because there's still a texture. It kind of makes me feel a little wintry, but it doesn't distract from all of the different prints. It's a nice solid grounding color. Because some of my pieces were different sizes that would fit with jelly roll, not all of them were from the same fabric position. So I had to do a little bit of figuring of what was gonna go where. I highly recommend, if you're changing around placements like this and not using the same fabric for all of one position, to write it down. Have a little notebook, make your little notes like, okay, all of fabric 1 strip assembly is going to be my light jelly rolls. Or if you have a paper copy of the pattern, you can write directly on the pattern, which is what I did. So here is my original pattern that I used to make this, where I wrote my little notes out, and I wrote how many strip assemblies I was gonna need, because that's gonna be important. And then I just wrote alongside my cutting instructions what fabric I was gonna use for each. So here I have blue, that's my blue fabric. And then I just made little notes on here I want to use my medium and light color jelly roll strips for, and down here I wanted my dark jelly roll strips for. So that helped me keep my head on straight while I was switching things around, changing them up. Really, really helpful in the long run. So let's take a look at how I sorted my jelly roll strips out to decide where they needed to go. First off, I suggest sorting them into colors of light, medium, and dark. So I just took my jelly roll strips, and I'd say that's kind of a medium. So it's medium, and I would just make little piles. These are all I have left, so I used most of my dark ones, as you will see. And some of these might be a little bit backwards, but I feel like those are medium compared to that. And then I have my dark. I'd start here. And then I looked at my pattern and I saw that I need 8 strip assemblies, which you're gonna end up with like this. Here is one of our completed strip assemblies. So I needed 1 fabric here, which was going to be my additional yardage since I had to cut that larger. Then I have a number 2 and my number 3. So what I decided to do is I thought, let me use a fabric number 3, like a dark, for all of the fabric number 3s in my strip assemblies. Then I wanted to make my mediums and my lights kind of alternate for that fabric number 2 position in my strip assemblies. And then I just kind of pulled together different strip assemblies. I needed 8, so I built 8 combinations of just fabrics I liked. So I'd take a dark, and then I'd say, oh, okay, well, I really like this one. So then I would pull that away. And then that would be my first one, partnered with my blue fabric. Then you take little clippies, just clip them together, which we sell these clips online, and they're really useful for binding or for projects like this when you need to keep things together. And then I would just set this to the side and I would make my next set. And I would just do that, pulling out the fabrics I liked the best. What did I want to showcase? and going between my fabrics, my medium fabrics, and my light fabrics for that number 2. After you do that, you set them aside and see what you have left to play with your borders. Now, like I said, there are 2 borders that you can use jelly roll strips in because you cut them down a little. So here we have our first border, which is normally your fabric number 2. And then we have our number 2 border, which is normally your fabric number 1. So what I chose to do is I just picked different fabrics that I really liked that I could use as my borders, just whatever my next favorite print that I didn't really use in the center of my quilt was. I looked at how many strips I was going to need for my border strips. So for example, say this told me I needed to cut 5 with the fabric strips. I would just count out 5 jelly roll strips because they are with the fabric. And so that was perfect. As you can see right here though, I didn't have enough jelly roll strips to make it one complete color all the way around. So I just decided I'm going to use 2. And I just looked at what did I have multiple prints of in different colorways. And that's what I thought kind of kept it cohesive, but also added this extra little pop and fun stuff. So when I started my cutting, I started with the simplest one first, just to get it all done. And that meant I was going to start with my yardage. I knew I was going to use this blue for my fabric number 1 in my strip assemblies, as well as in my border 3 and my binding. And I just followed the pattern exactly for those things. I didn't need to change anything up. I just looked at how many strips for all those things I needed, cut them, labeled them, clipped them off to the side, and then we were done. Next, it was time for jelly rolls. We had our pieces already sorted out, so we knew what we were doing. And I knew I was going to use my fabric number, my dark jelly roll strips for my fabric number 3 in all of my strip assemblies. So what I did is I went and I looked, I would pull them one at a time, one of my little sections at a time, and see what I needed this to be trimmed down to. Then we just do a nice little trim. I like to leave a little bit extra on this side so that I can rotate it and trim again, just to make sure I get a nice clean edge. And I'm gonna line it up at the top here with a little bit past right there where I need it to be, and make sure it's nice and straight on the bottom. Go and get one strip. I did them one at a time like this. However, if you are braver than I am, you could try stacking a few of them at a time. That all depends on your personal preference. So now I'm gonna rotate it, and we're gonna line it up exactly what we need that measurement to be, with that on the edge, making sure that our lines are on the edge of our jelly roll strip here, as well as on the top. And we're gonna get a nice clean trim. Boop. Ta-da! And it is a little bit slower doing it one at a time. However, I only needed 8 strip assemblies, and so I was like, I only gotta do that 8 times. So it really wasn't that big of a deal, and it didn't take me very long. I like to, while I have that number in my mind, do all of my fabric number 3s, like all my dark jelly roll strips first. I just put this one back with its partner, boop, clip it back, and then I would take the next bundle and I would go through that way. So that way I wasn't mixing up numbers, changing up my cutting measurements. I was able to focus on one. Then I would just rinse and repeat for my fabric number 2s, which are my light and medium jelly rolls. Then they're all ready to go. I put those together with my yardage that we cut at the beginning. Then after you've cut everything, you're gonna sew them on the long edges like this. So you have these nice long strips right here, and it's gonna be the whole width of fabric. So that's really easy. Just get one seam going down. And then we're gonna make our blocks, which is also super easy. I recommend using a square. I love square rulers. I never ever thought that I would become a person who's excited about rulers and irons, but I get so excited when I can get a new square ruler. Oh, it's a size I don't have. Ooh. It's the little things in life, huh? And we're gonna follow the same method that we did earlier with our jelly roll strips, where we went a little bit, we left a little bit of fabric to the side so we could flip it and trim it. And we're just gonna line that up nicely a little bit past that selvage so that we can cut that off. Whoop. Then we flip, move that out of the way, line it up with what you need, and then we're just gonna trim off that selvage, and voila, we have our block. It's as easy as that. So the next step, you're gonna have to lay out your quilt to figure out where you want all these blocks to go. I do this even when I'm making a traditional 3-yard quilt with 3 1-yard cuts of fabric. It's just a really good opportunity for you to double check your work, make sure everything is going the right direction, because no one wants to use that seam ripper. So this helps protect you a little bit from that and helps keep you from needing to do that. When you're doing multiple fabrics and you're changing things up, I think it's extra important because it helps you decide where you want all of your fabrics to go. I really like to make sure that my fabrics are dispersed amongst the top of the quilt evenly so that I don't have all of the same prints right next to each other. I want them spaced out. So I always lay them out and then I move blocks around trying to decide what I like the best. And once I finally land on what I want, I take a picture. Take a picture. Very important. I cannot stress how important it is because that way you've already done all that work. You don't want to do that work again. You have that picture to remind you where you put everything. So if something does get out of place, it gets knocked over, the cat walks on it and moves your pieces all around. I'm not speaking from personal experience on that one. You know exactly where your pieces are supposed to go. So always snap that picture. Now let's take a look at borders. We're going to follow the same basic principles that we just did for our strip assemblies. I like to take them one border at a time. So I get all my strips for this one border, look at how I need to cut my strips down, and then sew them end to end. And then we'll press them and sew them to the sides of our quilts, trim those even, and do it for the top and bottom. Because I was using multiple fabrics, I sort of played around with where I wanted my fabric to go to try to make it kind of like corners were alternating, but you can totally leave that up to fate. You don't have to think about it. You can just let the colors fall where they will and it will look gorgeous. And I do want to mention these pinked edges right here. That's what these little ridges are. It's so that it doesn't unravel when the fabric is coming to you. There's a lot of debate on should you trim these off, should you not? Say you're just using the jelly roll with that 2.5 measurement. Do I need to trim it off just to get those little pinked edges off? For this quilt, I did. I did trim all of those off, even if I needed a strip that was 2.5 inches. But I just made another quilt where I used jelly rolls in my borders, and I didn't do that. I don't think there was really that much of a difference. I didn't have trouble with one over the other, and I think it ended up just fine. So really, I think it's just personal preference, because I didn't have any issues with sewing, pressing, or getting it quilted. So whatever your preference is, go with that. Your quilt top is done and it's time to be quilted. I sent mine out to be quilted. I used one of the quilters we use here at Fabric Café. Her name is Lucinda Cox with Yellow Rose Quilt and Stitch Studio, and a link is in the description for her business. So she sends me 3 different designs when I give her a quilt, and I get to pick which one I like. It's always my favorite part. So first off, she sent me one called Crystal Snow, and we kept with the snowflake theme because I did want snowflakes on it. I knew that for sure. And I really like the way this one moves with those little swirls coming in, and those snowflakes are a nice, good, fun style. Option number 2 is called First Snow, And it also was a swirl, but it was a kind of different swirl. It was a little bit softer. The snowflakes had a little bit more detail in them. And then our third option was Snow Winds. And this one's almost a little bit geometric, like a little bit funky. Those snowflakes are a little bit more pointed, a little bit more of a statement. So I ended up choosing the first option because I liked the snowflakes on that one the most. That was basically the only reason. I was really torn between the first two because I liked the style of the snowflakes and how soft that swirl was. But ultimately, I liked that first one the most because I thought it really looked like snow blowing around, and also the way that the curve was sort of felt reminiscent of some of the fabrics in my quilt. I also chose a light silver gray thread so that it would pick up some of these shimmery bits that are in my fabric. There are these little silver shimmers. And I also thought it would make it look kind of like snow, you know, kind of like snow falling through a window. And I thought it would be a nice complement to these sort of darker colors, and it would show up well on those, but it would also not distract from the fabric. So for my backing, I chose a silver metallic shiny, and it's so pretty and elegant. And I thought it just picked up that reflective silver that was in the focus, as well as worked really well with this snowflake design. And you can see it popping really well with that silver thread and that nice silver backing. It just made it feel cool and calm and wintry, which I love. I wanted to take a minute to share a quilt that one of you guys made. Doris sent in a picture of a quilt she made using a panel, and I was so excited to see it's the same panel that I used in a quilt I made. I think it turned out beautiful, Doris. I love seeing it in a different pattern, different partner fabrics. And I know you said you were a little bit disappointed with your fabric choices, but I think you did a great job. I love that yellowy gold for your number 2 because I think it picks up a lot of the letters in those panel blocks. And you paired it with a green with a little, it looks like a little floral print on it maybe. And I think that keeps it grounded, it keeps that earthy and that kind of floral, natural element that is in the panel. And I think it looks beautiful. You should be very proud of yourself. Thank you for sharing it. I was so excited to see it. And I love seeing all in these different patterns. If you would like your picture to be featured in a video, then send your pictures of your finished quilts to welisten@fabriccafe.com. So don't forget about that kit we showed you at the beginning. If you want to get something that's a similar vibe to what I've got going on here, we have that beautiful snowflake kit. Also, if you enjoyed this pattern, that comes from our book, Quilt Favorites. It's also available as an individual pattern. If you would like to see the panel quilt that I made, then be sure to watch the video that pops up next. It's Hannah with Fabric Cafe. Happy quilting!